A 911 call. A black teenager. A mother who arrived just in time. But what happens when the truth hits harder than the accusation? What if the real danger wasn't the boy walking home, but the person who picked up the phone? The golden glow of the evening sun cast long shadows over Willow Creek Estates, a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where the lawns were trimmed with precision, the driveways boasted luxury cars, and strangers weren't expected to walk alone. Jamal Carter, a 16-year-old high school athlete, adjusted the strap on his gym bag as he walked home from basketball practice. His headphones blasted music, drowning out the world around him, as he took a shortcut through the neighborhood to save time. Inside one of those pristine homes, Margaret Whitman stood at her bay window, her fingers tightening around the curtain as she watched Jamal walk past. She had lived in Willow Creek for nearly 2 decades and prided herself on knowing every face and every routine. This boy, however, was unfamiliar, black, athletic, carrying a bag, moving alone through the neighborhood. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach, though she couldn't explain exactly why. Her pulse quickened as irrational fear took over, and without thinking, she reached for her phone. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, but Margaret's own was edged with doubt. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious individual in our neighborhood," she said, glancing back at Jamal, who had now paused at the corner, switching his playlist. The dispatcher asked if he was doing anything illegal, but Margaret hesitated, then cleared her throat. "Well, no, but he's walking slow, looking around like he's checking out houses. I just don't recognize him, and I'd rather be safe than sorry." A few streets away, Officers Coleman and Reeves cruised in their squad car, responding to a different call when the dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. "Possible prowler reported at Willow Creek Estates. Male, black, mid-teens, carrying a bag." Coleman, a stocky officer with over a decade of experience, exchanged a look with his younger partner, Reeves, who had just joined the force 2 years ago. "Let's check it out," Coleman said, flipping on the sirens as they turned toward the neighborhood. Jamal was only 2 blocks from home when the sharp wail of a siren cut through his music. He turned, startled, as the squad car pulled up fast, gravel crunching under the tires. The doors swung open, and the officers stepped out, hands near their holsters, eyes locked on him. "Hey, stop right there," Coleman barked, making Jamal's stomach tighten. Confused, Jamal pulled out his earbuds, his pulse spiking. What's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Reeves took a step closer, eyes scanning him up and down. "What's in the bag?" he demanded. Jamal blinked, then held up his gym bag, still slung over his shoulder. "My basketball gear," he answered, his voice calm but his hands starting to sweat. "Where you headed?" Coleman pressed, his tone skeptical. "Home," Jamal answered, nodding down the street. "I live just a few blocks from here." But Coleman wasn't convinced. "That right. Give me the address," he said, crossing his arms. Jamal hesitated. He knew this wasn't just about an address. He had seen this happen before, heard the stories, knew how quickly things could escalate. Before he could respond, Reeves reached for the bag, yanking it off his shoulder. "Hey, that's my stuff," Jamal protested, stepping back slightly. "Relax," Coleman muttered, as Reeves unzipped the bag, rummaging through it. In a pair of basketball shoes, a sweaty jersey, a water bottle, nothing remotely suspicious. But that didn't stop the officers from exchanging a glance. "Why are you cutting through this neighborhood?" Coleman asked, squinting at him. Jamal exhaled sharply, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "It's just a shortcut, man. I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, trying to keep his tone even. Reeves glanced back at Coleman, uncertain. "Maybe he's telling the truth," he murmured. Coleman wasn't convinced. "Then why'd someone call the cops on him?" he muttered, folding his arms. That's when Jamal noticed something out of the corner of his eye, a black sub rolling toward them at full speed. His chest tightened as he recognized the car immediately. The door swung open, and out stepped Alicia Carter, his mother, the mayor of Columbus, Ohio. But the officers had no idea who they had just stopped. The moment Alicia Carter stepped out of the sub, the air around them thickened. She wasn't just any mother rushing to protect her son. She was the mayor of Columbus, Ohio. Dressed in a navy blazer and heels that clicked with every step, she exuded an authority that made people listen before she even spoke. But right now, she wasn't here as a mayor, she was here as a mother. Officer Coleman straightened his posture, his brain struggling to catch up with what was unfolding in front of him. He recognized her from press conferences and city meetings, but he had never expected to see her like this. His partner, Reeves, shifted uneasily, realizing just how badly they might have misjudged the situation. Jamal, still standing with his bag half open, exhaled in relief his mother had arrived just in time. Reeves stepped forward, trying to maintain control. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. We're handling a situation here." Alicia didn't break her stride as she approached. Her eyes locked onto the officers. "Oh, I see that," she said smoothly, but there was a sharpness in her voice that cut through the air. Jamal started to speak, but Alicia held up a hand, stopping him before he could say a word. Her focus remained on the officers, her expression calm but unreadable. Coleman squared his shoulders, trying to burst himself. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the area." Alicia arched a brow, her voice steady. "Suspicious." She let the word hang in the air, daring them to explain. Reeves shifted again, suddenly aware of how that word sounded coming from his own mouth. "Yes, ma'am," he continued quickly. "We stopped him to ask some questions, to confirm if he actually lives here." Alicia inhaled sharply, then pulled out her phone with deliberate precision. With a few taps, she held up the screen for them to see. It was Jamal's student ID, school records, their home address, and a photo of the two of them at a community event just last month. Silence settled between them, heavier than before. Reeves swallowed hard and Coleman's jaw tightened. "So tell me," Alicia said slowly, her voice dangerously controlled, "did you stop my son because he was actually doing something suspicious, or because someone assumed he didn't belong?" The officers exchanged glances but said nothing. Alicia's grip on her phone tightened slightly. Behind them, Margaret Whitman stood frozen in her doorway, her stomach twisting into knots. The second Alicia had stepped out of that car, she had put the pieces together. She had called the police on the mayor's son, and now she was watching the consequences of her actions unfold in real time. Alicia took a step closer, her gaze locked onto Coleman and Reeves. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "You searched his bag," she stated, letting each word settle. "You questioned where he lived. You assumed he didn't belong. Why?" Coleman's face hardened. "We were just following procedure," he said, though his voice wasn't as steady as before. Alicia tilted her head slightly, her expression sharp. "Procedure," she repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. Reeves cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "We got a call about a suspicious person." Alicia let out a slow breath, her patience thinning. "A teenage boy walking home," she said, each word laced with quiet fury. Neither officer had an answer for that, and Jamal clenched his fists at his sides, still feeling the sting of being treated like a suspect in his own neighborhood. Alicia finally turned, her sharp gaze landing directly on Margaret. "Was it you?" she asked, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. Margaret's mouth opened, then shut. She had no excuse that wouldn't make her sound exactly like the person she never wanted to believe she was. She wasn't racist, she told herself. She was just being cautious. But now, standing here, watching a mother defend her son against an accusation that had no foundation, she realized she had been wrong. Alicia's expression didn't soften. "Do you know what could have happened here?" she asked, and Margaret felt something heavy settle in her chest. Jamal could have been tackled, arrested, slammed against a squad car for resisting, or worse. All because a woman who had lived in the same house for 15 years saw a black teenager with a gym bag and decided that was enough reason to call the police. And Alicia didn't need to say it, Margaret already knew. But instead of apologizing, Coleman shifted his stance, trying to move past it. "If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way." Alicia exhaled sharply, disbelief flickering across her face. "That's it," she said, shaking her head. Reeves hesitated. "Look, we were just responding to a call." "Yeah," Alicia interrupted, her voice low. "You were." She turned back to Jamal, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, baby. Let's go home." Jamal slung his bag over his shoulder and followed his mother to the sub. The officers walked back to their squad car, muttering under their breath. And Margaret, she just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, watching them drive away. The ride home was quiet, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. Jamal stared out the window, replaying everything in his head. The flashing lights, the way they searched his bag like he was a criminal, the way they looked through him, not at him. Alicia gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. She had known this moment would come eventually. She just didn't think it would happen so soon. She inhaled deeply, glancing at her son. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jamal let out a slow breath. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice quiet. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I get it," she said, though she wished she didn't. He turned to her, his expression troubled. "What would have happened if you weren't there?" Alicia's stomach clenched, but she kept her face unreadable. She didn't have an answer she wanted to say out loud. Instead, she reached over, squeezing his hand. "You did everything right," she assured him. Jamal sighed, shaking his head. And it still didn't matter. Alicia looked at him, then really looked at him. A 16-year-old kid, still sweaty from basketball practice, still carrying the weight of a moment that never should have happened. She knew this wasn't just about today. It was about every story like this. Every kid like him. Every parent like her who had to teach their children how to move through a world that saw them as a threat first and a person second. Across the neighborhood, Margaret sat in her living room, staring at the phone in her hands. The same phone she had used to call 911. The same phone that could have been the reason Jamal never made it home. Her stomach twisted. She thought she was being cautious. She thought she was protecting her neighborhood. But now, she realized she had just been afraid. And for the first time, she had to ask herself, afraid of what? This isn't just a story about one afternoon in one neighborhood. It's a reality that plays out every day. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we stop pretending not to see it. This story isn't just about one misunderstanding. It's about the quiet, everyday biases that shape the way we see the world, the way we judge people before we even know their names. Jamal wasn't a threat. He was a kid walking home. And yet one phone call nearly turned a simple evening into something much worse. We hear these stories all the time, don't we? A black teenager walking through a neighborhood. A mother forced to prove that her son belongs. A life that could have been changed forever all, because someone let fear and prejudice cloud their judgment. But here's the truth, assumptions have consequences. And too often, those consequences don't come for the people making the call. They come for the people being called on. If this story makes you uncomfortable, good. Growth comes from discomfort. Change begins when we stop excusing our fears and start questioning them. Next time you catch yourself making an assumption about someone, pause. Ask yourself, am I seeing a person or am I seeing my own bias? Because the difference between those two things could be the difference between life and death.